John and Kendra Smiley are joining us on the couches this morning with a little parenting advice. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ready?
Ready.
All right, let's get to today's question. What do you do when you and your spouse don't agree on discipline? I would have to say this is probably a pretty common dilemma. So what do you think?
Well, it is common because, of course, you were raised in your household with that set, which you either agree with or disagree with, and your husband wasn't raised in the same household. It's important, though, for you to reach some sort of agreement. And the interesting thing is this question talks about discipline, which is in essence consequences. But one of the first things you have to look at and agree on as mom and dad is where are the boundaries going to be? Because a lot of times we think we're disagreeing on what the consequence should be, but really we haven't come to an agreement on what the boundary. The one parent thinks, oh, it's okay if they do that. The other parent not only thinks it's not okay, but here's what we should do when they break or when they step over that boundary.
Right, and it's not obviously a good idea to fight or disagree when things are happening. The best thing is to have a conversation, obviously. And when you're going into the conversation as mom and dad, there are a couple things you need to keep in mind. First of all, be flexible. You go into that kind of thing, don't think, boy, I'm right and my spouse is wrong, because probably you're not going to get very far. Be a good listener. Anytime in a conversation, we need to listen to the other person's, what they think. The other thing in this kind of a conversation is no emotion. Kendra and I call that having an adult conversation, because so much of the time on both sides we get emotional, and as soon as we get emotional, then probably the learning, agreeing goes out the window. So try really, really hard not to be emotional. And the other thing that Kendra and I have found in this specific discussion about boundaries and consequences is to ask each other why. When you take a stance, it's interesting that one spouse asks the other spouse why. Why do you think that? Because there are a lot of times things in the background, and we've found this talking to parents, and sometimes they don't make sense and you don't understand, but when you ask that question why, it brings up a lot of good conversation. Right.
Usually if you don't understand something, if something doesn't make sense, it's because you don't have enough information.
Okay.
And so trying to get that information. And actually when John said, you know, the idea of having an adult conversation, that's a great code you can use, because sometimes you're in the midst of disagreeing about something, and if one of you just goes, let's have an adult conversation. Oh, okay. You know, rather than stop being so disagreeable. That usually doesn't work as well.
Yeah, I would say you're probably right about that.
So that's a good code that the parents out there can use.
All right, well, great advice as always. And if you have a question you'd like the Smileys to tackle, send it over to their website. And if we answer it here on the show, you'll get a free copy of one of their books. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Our parenting experts, John and Kendra Smiley, are joining us on the couches this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ready to give a little parenting advice? All right, let's get to the question. What boundaries do you recommend for cell phone use for kids? What do you think?
Well, there isn't like one set of rules. The boundaries will depend on the maturity and the responsibility level of your particular child. And I think one of the things that parents need to do first is ask themselves this question: does my child need a cell phone? Interestingly enough, 60% of kids ages 8 to 12 have a cell phone now. I know, it's kind of mind-boggling. It really is. And, you know, so is your 8-year-old responsible? Well, you need to look at that and decide, do they need one?
Right, and I think the other thing, as we look at not only boundaries, but that question, do they need it? And ask yourself, you know, why does my child have a cell phone? A lot of times parents answer that question with safety. Right. It's safe, okay? And so if that's the reason, then the appropriate boundaries for that child to have a cell phone for the safety, you know, when do they need it for safety? Right after school, you know, and so the boundaries then would go along with the reason that they have that cell phone. And the other thing is it easier for parents? A lot of times kids have cell phones because like they have practices and things like that, and they can help mom and dad out by calling with a practice. So again, boundaries then would be associated with the need that child has for that cell phone. And it's good that mom and dad are the ones that decide those boundaries, not the kids. Mom and dad are looking at it. Do you need a cell phone? And say, yes, you do need a cell phone. Okay, now these are the boundaries that we're giving you.
And if we're talking about a cell phone for a young child, does a young child need a smartphone? No, once you have a smartphone, a whole new world opens up. And we feel that an 8-year-old and probably all the way up to a 12-year-old, those aren't the ages when they need to be introduced to some of the things, because you have access to the internet once you have a smartphone. And, you know, just the expense of it too. Is this a great way to invest in this child? Probably not. Now, a basic phone, you know, so that ideas, you know, they might be able to be used for safety or to really to make the parents' life easier. Those are all right. But do they need a cell phone? What are the boundaries? You have to look at each individual child.
Great advice, especially for parents dealing with this 21st century problem. So thanks so much. And if you have a question you'd like the Smileys to tackle, send it over to their website. And if we answer it here on the show, you'll get a free copy of one of their books. Thanks so much. It's time for a little parenting advice with John and Kendra Smiley. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ready to get to today's question?
Let's do it.
Here it is. My husband and I have been married for almost 3 years, and for the last year, his parents have been putting pressure on us to have a child. How do you put a stop to it?
Well, I think it's amazing how quickly people forget what they felt like when they had been married only 3 years.
Yes.
And so I think that this is a very valid question, because when and if this newly married, and that is newly married, couple decides to have children, it is totally their decision, because the children will be their responsibility.
Right, and in a situation like this, Kendra and I feel like the husband is the one that should take the lead, not the wife. The wife should be in the background. Husband and wife should talk about it together before the husband actually has a conversation with the parents, so they're in agreement of what the conversation is going to be like. But it's the husband's responsibility here to go in and sit down with the mom and dad and have this conversation, because you don't want the daughter-in-law to be the one that gets in trouble. And obviously the son and his parents can have a better conversation. You put the daughter-in-law in it, and now other things come up and emotions come up and things like that. So you don't want that to happen. Just let the husband go in, sit down with mom and dad, and say, look, we need to have a serious conversation here. We need to get this settled, because you're making us feel bad. I mean, this kind of a conversation, you really can't beat around the bush. You've really got to come to the point.
Right. And then I would encourage this young couple to remember how they feel today, so that when someday they are the mother and father-in-law, they aren't repeating. Learn from this parents, the next generation above, learn from their mistakes.
Yes, I would agree. And it could be that these parents think, you know, that it's a joke, it's all in good fun, but obviously it's putting some pressure on this couple.
Right, and that's a great point, because if they do feel it's a joke and funny, it's not a joke to the daughter-in-law, and that's really, really important. And so then all the son has to do is go in and say, Mom and Dad, this is not funny, and you're hurting whatever the daughter-in-law's name is, and she's taking this seriously. So that's a great point.
Yes,
absolutely. All right, great advice as always. And if you have a question that you would like the Smileys to tackle, send it over to their website. And if we answer it here on the show, you'll get a free copy of one of their books. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's time for a little parenting advice with John and Kendra Smiley. Good morning.
Good morning.
Ready for today's question?
Ready.
Yes.
All right, here we go. My son behaves better for my husband than for me. I'm not sure what to do. What do you think?
Well, this is the hard truth here, and it's not fair, but a lot of times a son will respond better to dad than to mom. I guess it's the guy thing. And so what needs to happen here is this son needs to understand that dad and mom are one. We're a team. We're wearing the same color jersey. And so in this case, if he disobeys mom, it's just like disobeying dad. And there are consequences for it. So just letting your kids know, dad and mom, we're in this together. You're not going to play one against the other. And if dad's better at that, dad's going to take care of it.
Right, and usually this kind of thing happens just for the extreme cases of discipline.
Right.
And we want to bring out that mom needs to assert herself in the minor things, that she can handle the minor things. She needs to do that. All right, so that the little things, she's not calling dad all the time. But like in our case, when we were raising kids, for the extreme cases, and that's what Kendra is talking about here, and mom and dad are one, and then dad can help so much, especially with sons. Because if the son is responding, like in this mom says, that's responding better to the dad, then the dad can help that situation, have a talk with the son, and do exactly what Kendra just said. Look, mom and I are one. If you upset mom, you know, you're upsetting me, and we work together in this thing. And it's absolutely interesting that even young kids understand this. They understand when they can play mom and dad one against the other, and they very much understand when mom and dad are on the same page. And so this dad can be such a huge help to mom in this situation.
It's interesting because as adults, one of our sons told me one time, he said, "Mom, you really weren't that good at discipline. But I always pretended like you were, because if I acted like my heart was broken, then you were a little reticent to discipline me the next time." I thought, oh my goodness, which reminds me, Kate, to tell every parent that's listening right now, never forget how smart your children are.
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's very important advice. All right, well, if you have a question that you would like the Smileys to tackle, send it over to their website. And if we answer it here on the show, you'll get a free copy of one of their books. Thanks so much.
Thank you.